أهلا بكم مشاهدينا الأعزاء، مرحبا بكم في حلقة اليوم مع إحدى الفتيات الرائعات اسمها حلا، وهي كاتبة عمرها 10 سنوات، وسألقي بها. أهلا، كيفك حلا؟
كويس الحمد لله.
مهم. بتفضلي أحكي معك عربي ولا إنجليزي؟
إنجليزي لو سمحت.
Okay. Uh, can you raise your voice?
Is this good?
Yeah.
Alright.
Okay. So tell us something about yourself. Tell us your name. Where do you go to school? What do you do?
Well, my name is Hala Al-Zaghul. I'm 10 years old and I go to school at Steve McLean. I live in Ottawa with my mom, my two brothers, and my cat. Uh, some of my hobbies are reading, writing, and drawing. I like reading and I thought I should bring it to good. So I'm gonna read for you every Wednesday at 5 o'clock.
Nice, nice. We'll be looking forward to that. Is there a certain way you like? Is there a certain type of book you like?
Well, I usually like reading about fantasy. Um,
Hmm.
But other than that, I really read any book.
Do you like specific authors? How do you pick your books?
For me, I just find a book and read it. If halfway through I don't really like it, I just put it down and find another book. I read mostly everything except encyclopedias, and that
Hmm.
I find it boring.
Do you find there's a difference between books and movies? Like,
Yeah,
do you find
yeah.
there's a difference between reading material
I
and
think
visual material?
I would definitely choose reading over television because when you're reading, you can really try to imagine the characters and the places in your own way. But when you look at a movie, they show you what it looks like, and you can't really imagine it and paint a picture in your mind. So I think I prefer reading material a lot.
Hmm. Do you have any published books for yourself?
No, not yet. I'm working on a book.
Can you tell us something about that book?
Well, it's gonna be fantasy, a lot of magic, and I'm still figuring out some ideas. But
Hmm.
it's
Nice. Okay, so I'll hand it over to you right now, and you can get into your book.
all right.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so the book I'm going to be reading today is called Going Someplace Special by Patricia C. McKissack and illustrated by Jerry Pinkney. Trisha Ann was about to burst with excitement. Crossing her fingers and closing her eyes, she blurted out her question. Mama Frances, may I go to someplace special by myself today? Pretty please. I know where to get off the bus and what streets to take and all. Although it had another name, Trisha Ann always called it someplace special because it was her favorite spot in the world. Mama Frances answered, I don't know if I'm ready to turn you loose into the world, Mama Frances answered, tying the sash of Trisha Ann's dress. Going off alone is a mighty big step. I'm ready, the girl said, taking a giant leap across the floor. See what a big step I can make? Mama Frances chuckled, all the time studying her granddaughter's face. I trust you'll be particular and remember everything I've told you. I will, Trisha Ann said, real confident like. Suddenly, her smile grew into a full grin. So you're saying I can go? I would come, but you best hurry on before I change my mind. Pulling her pocketbook up on her shoulder, Trisha Ann blew her grandmother a thank you kiss. Then she rushed at the door and down the sidewalk. And no matter what, Mama Frances called after her, hold your head up high and act like you belong to somebody. At the corner, a green and white bus came to a jerky stop and hissed. When the doors folded back, Trisha Ann bounded up the steps and dropped in the fair same as when Mama Frances was with her. The girl squared her shoulders, walked to the back, and took a seat behind the Jim Crow sign that said, Colored Section. Trisha Ann had seen such signs all her life. She recalled the first time she and Mama Frances had taken this bus ride, and her grandmother had told her, those signs can tell us where to sit, but they can't tell us what to think. I'm going to think about someplace special, Trisha Ann said to herself and turned to look out the window. Stop by stop, the bus began to fill. At the farmer's market, people crowded on, carrying bags of fruits and vegetables. Miss Grinnell, Mama Frances's friend from the sewing club, climbed on board. As she inched her way towards the back, Trisha Ann noticed that there were no seats left behind the Jim Crow sign, so she stood up and gave Miss Grinnell hers. It's not fair, she said, glaring at the empty seats up front. No, but that's the way it is, honey, said Miss Grinnell. I don't understand why, she began, but by now the bus had reached Trisha Ann's stop in front of Capitol Square in the heart of downtown. The door swung open and she hurried off. Carry yourself proud, Miss Grinnell called out the window as the bus pulled away. Holding her hat, Trisha Ann leaned back as far as she could to see Peace Fountain's magnificent water show. It made her dizzy to watch the sprays that shot high into the air, but she liked the feeling and turned round and round with her arms outstretched. Then, giggling, she staggered on wobbly legs to a nearby bench. Instantly, Trisha Ann leaped to her feet. On the bench was a sign that said, For Whites Only. Her face fell, and she wished for Mama Frances's strong hand to hold. Silly signs, she muttered as she strutted away on sober legs. At the edge of the square, she greeted Jimmy Lee, a street vendor. What's got your face all clouded up like a stormy day? He asked, handing Trisha Ann a free pretzel. Jim Crow makes me so mad, she said. My grandfather was a stones mason on Peace Fountain. Why can't I sit down and enjoy it? Jimmy Lee pointed to a sign in Monroe's restaurant window. He said, My brother cooks all the food they serve. But do you think we can sit together on one of the tables and have a BLT and a cup of coffee together? Then with a chuckle he whispered, Not that I want to eat anything Jess cooks. The man can't even now scald water. The light changed and Trisha Ann carefully strutted across the street. Don't let those signs steal your happiness, Jimmy Lee called after her. He said, My brother cooks all the food they serve. Trisha Ann pulled her shoulders back and fixed her thoughts on being inside that warm and welcoming place where there were no signs. Hurrying up 10th Avenue, she passed the filling station and stopped to buy a pop to wash down Jimmy Lee's pretzel. At the second light, the Southland Hotel rose in front of her, as spectacular as a palace. Mr. John Willis, the hotel's doorman, saw her. I believe an angel done slipped away from heaven, he said, smiling. Trisha Ann managed to smile back. Mr. John Willis always said the nicest things. No, sir, it's just me. Your mouth is smiling, but your eyes aren't, he said. Just then, a long white car with 2 police escorts pulled up in front of the hotel. A man with black, shiny hair and shy eyes stepped out. Suddenly, people were everywhere, screaming and begging for his autograph. Trisha Ann got caught in the crowd and swept inside. So often she'd wondered what it would feel like to walk on the royal red carpet that covered the double-winding staircase, or to stand in the light of a chandelier that looked like a million diamonds strung together. Now, there she was, smack in the middle of Southland's grand lobby. Somebody pointed at her. What's she doing in here? It seemed as if the whole world had stopped talking, stopped moving, and was staring at her. The manager pushed his way to the front of the crowd. What makes you think you can come inside? No colored people are allowed. And he shooed the girl away with his arms. Trisha Ann backed out, shaking her head. I didn't mean, she said, trying hard not to cry. Hurrying past Mr. John Willis, Trisha Ann ran straight to the Mission Church ruins where Mama Frances often stopped to rest. There, in the protection of the walled garden, the girl let the tears come. Getting to someplace special isn't worth it, she sobbed. I'm going home. My flowers have been watered already, came a voice above her. It was Blooming Mary, an elderly woman who took care of the garden with neither permission nor pay. Everybody said she was addled, but Mama Frances didn't agree. Blooming Mary is a kind and gentle soul, she told Trisha Ann. You lost, child? The woman asked. Trying to steady her voice, Trisha Ann answered, No, ma'am. I just wish my grandmother was here to help me get to someplace special. You can't get there by yourself? It's too hard. I need my grandmother. Blooming Mary nodded and thought on the matter. Then she said, I believe your granny is here, just as my granny is here with me even as I speak. Listen close. Tell me what you hear. All Trisha Ann heard was the distant buzz of a bumblebee. What was Blooming Mary talking about? But as she listened closer, she began to hear her grandmother's steady voice. You are somebody, a human being, no better, no worse than anybody else in this world. Getting someplace special is not an easy route, but don't study on quitting. Just keep walking straight ahead, and you'll make it. Trisha Ann recalled these words from many conversations they'd had in this quiet place. They were so comforting. She didn't feel alone anymore. She wiped her eyes and straightened her hat. You're all right, ma'am, the girl told Blooming Mary. Mama Frances is here, and she wouldn't want me to turn back. So, you aren't lost after all, said Blooming Mary, giving Trisha Ann a bright orange zinnia. No, ma'am, I'm not. And saying goodbye, she headed real determined-like on her way. Two blocks later, Trisha Ann came to the Grand Music Palace, where a group had gathered for the matinee performance. As the girl approached, a little boy spoke to her. Howdy, I'm Hickey and I'm 6 years old today. You coming in? Before Trisha Ann could answer, an older girl grabbed his hand. Hush, boy, she said through clenched teeth. Colored people can't come through the front door. You gotta go round back and sit up in the buzzard's roost. Don't you know nothing? His sister whispered harshly. Hickey looked at Trisha Ann with wide eyes, wondering. Are you gonna sit up there? In the last 3 rows of the balcony? Why, I wouldn't sit up there even if watermelons bloomed in January. Besides, I'm going to someplace very, very special, she answered, and then Trisha Ann skipped away. I want to go where she's going, she heard Hickey say as his sister pulled him through the door. At the corner, Trisha Ann saw a building rising above all that surrounded it, looking proud in the summer sun. It was much more than bricks and stone. It was an idea. Mama Frances called it a doorway to freedom, and when she looked at it, she didn't feel angry or hurt or embarrassed. At last, she whispered, I've made it to someplace special. Before bounding up the steps and through the front door, Trisha Ann stopped to look up at the message chiseled in stone, the front facing. Public Library. All are welcome. The author's note. This is my story. Although the setting has been fictionalized, the events were taken from my own childhood growing up in Nashville, Tennessee. Nashville, like most southern cities in the 1950s, was segregated. The doors of hotels, restaurants, churches, and amusement parks were posted with Jim Crow segregation signs that barred African Americans, who had also endured the further indignities of riding in the backs of buses, attending in separate schools, sitting in the last rows of the balcony, and drinking from separate water fountains. But in the late 1950s, Nashville's Public Library Board of Directors quietly voted to integrate all their facilities. The downtown branch was one of the few places where there was no Jim Crow signs, and blacks were treated with some respect. Most African American parents waited until their children were mature enough to cope with segregation before allowing them to venture outside with the communities alone. I was almost 12 when my parents trusted me to make the trek to the library by myself. But like Trisha Ann, I had been forfeited with enough love, respect, and pride to overcome any situation I encountered. Along the way, I had to face all kinds of racial bigarity and discrimination. But for me, the library was always filled with a specialness that made the effort worthwhile. Since I felt welcome there, I checked out books more often. The more I read, the better I understood why my grandmother believed the library was someplace more exciting, more interesting, and more informative than hotels, movies, restaurants, and amusement parks. She, like Andrew Carnegie, whose great wealth helped to build the library, knew that reading is the doorway to freedom. And that's it.
Thank you so much. That was very nice. Can you tell us exactly why you picked this book specifically?
Well, I picked it because there are a lot of I wanted to spread awareness about the racial inequalities that are going on in this world right now. There's a lot of racism and there's also been a lot of protests that have spread across the US and all the world, and I just thought that it would be a right time to read this book.
How far do you think books can take us in the fight for equality?
Really, it's like, I mean, if you read it out, spread enough awareness, like I'm doing right now, I guess. Yeah, it can get really far.
Right, that was very beautiful. Thank you so much for being with us today. And I'm really looking forward to having you next week as well.
Also,
Thank you.
one more thing, a few more things. If you have any books, if you have any book recommendations that you would like me to read, just leave them in the comments. And I'll soon be making a YouTube channel for book reviews and recommendations.
Right. Thank you so much.
See you next week.
شكرا أعزائنا المشاهدين، وهاي كانت نصف ساعة اللقاء مع حلا لتقرأ لنا كتابا رائعا، ونتمنى أن نكرر هذه التجربة كل أسبوع في نفس الوقت. شكرا لكم.